Welcome to Hanif Bismi show. This episode, we talk about the ground reality in Afghanistan. Afghanistan being the hot subject since the American start withdrawing. Tonight, we'll discuss what was happening in Afghanistan and what is happening now. Afghanistan occupies a unique geostrategic position in the region. It has been at the crossroads of ancient trade and culture, which enriched its history, economy, and diversity. This is what makes Afghanistan part of a great civilization. Afghanistan has been a dream of empire builders. Great armies of the time have attempted to subdue it, but they only ended up in ruin. Afghanistan's landscape, unfriendly mountainous terrain, and harsh deserts have protected the country from foreign adventurers who fought back by fierce Afghan warriors and not allowed to disturb their freedom and way of life. Afghans love their freedom more than their own life. From Alexander the Great to Genghis Khan, tried to invade Afghanistan only to taste unexpected ferocious resistance. 19th century witnessed 3 Anglo-Afghan wars under the political agenda of the Great Game. British Empire intruded into Afghanistan to protect their East India Company and lost shamefully. In our time, Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. And this resulted in its own disintegration. In year 2001, the only superpower of the world, the US invaded, destroyed Afghanistan over 20 years, only to withdraw suddenly one night without informing the Afghan army, which had been trained by US. Afghanistan known as the invaders' graveyard. Today, you all might have seen the last American soldier is withdrawing as 31st of August. The innocent people of Afghanistan have suffered for the last 40 years, not due to any fault of their own. Afghans have not invaded any other nation. They haven't attacked any other country. Their beautiful, resourceful country has been destroyed. Millions of people displaced and killed. Thousands injured. Their freedom, security, and integrity taken away by foreigners for decades in the name of modernity, peace, and democracy. The recent development shows more despair, uncertainty, fear, and possible a dark future. Today we have 2 special guests on Hanif Bismi show. We have Mr. Rustam Attai, a Sydney-based lawyer, 2 times kickboxing world champion, and Afghan Australian community leader. And we have Miss Nasreen Hanifi, a Sydney-based psychologist who got experience for last 15 years, and a PhD candidate, and she's a current director of My Ability Care. And she's very active in the community, specializing trauma and anxiety as a psychologist. So once again, welcome Ms. Hanifi and Mr. Attai to Hanif Bismi show, and on behalf of 5 News Australia, we welcome you.
Thank you.
So it's what's happening today is many things, and things are continuously happening. And I would like to ask your conversation through a question, and you can answer. And first, I would like to ask Ms. Hanifi, could you please explain how the Afghan diaspora in Australia is handling the current situation in Afghanistan as they have families back home?
There's a mixture of emotions at the moment, because we're just not talking about the current people, the people here who have families that live there. We're talking about generations of Afghans that come all the way through from the 1980s since the Soviet Union invasion, then obviously throughout the Taliban era and whatnot. So there is a lot of mixed emotions. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of frustration. They're obviously very anxious because they have family that live there and they're not really sure what the outcome of the new regime is going to be, and obviously their families, will they be at risk or not? So there's a lot of that happening here as well. So there's lots of advocacy in terms of trying to advocate for families that live over there. But in terms of I don't think it's just, if we're just going to leave it to this context, I don't think it's just about this. I think there's generations that have come that are experiencing similar emotions, and that sort of has been trickling down for a very long time, from generation to generation, and hence, this new overtake of Afghanistan by the Taliban has really brought people's fears and anxieties back onto the surface, unfortunately, because I have family that live back in Afghanistan, so obviously my parents are very scared for their safety, because we know the history. So there's always, people reference that back to how it was 20 years ago. So there's that level of uncertainty, I think, that people are also experiencing.
Thank you. Next question, I would like to talk to Mr. Attai. In the last 2 weeks webinar, a female journalist from Kabul attended and said many journalists in the mainstream media are not reporting exactly what is happening in Kabul. I know that. What is your thoughts about that? Because you were also there in the same webinar.
Look, that. I mean, I'm not there. I don't know the situation, but that very well could be true, especially because of Taliban having a bad record in the past with always using force. But then again, there could also be a propaganda war, and that's one thing I learned from the Syrian war. Was there's a lot of propaganda. You just don't. It becomes very difficult. Which could be propaganda pro-government, propaganda anti-government. So in this case, propaganda pro the Taliban, and propaganda anti-Taliban. And it's very early. The thing is, the Taliban have at least shown, or they've said that they are different to the Taliban that they used to be, and we don't know. And we will just find out. I think they're probably in the early stages. There might be a lot of truth to a lot of journalists being interfered with their reporting due to force being put on them. But it's just hard to say. I guess through time, once we've gone through a bit more time, we'll have a bit more clarity in relation to what's happening, and if Taliban has changed, or if they are still, as I guess brutal with the way they are with holding freedom of speech and freedom of expression, like the way they used to be. So it's difficult. It's very difficult, especially during the war and everything. There's a lot of propaganda, which it's not easy to assess. So yeah,
So
and
I
I've seen the clip.
say something with lines. I think it's really hard to sort of channel that really well, because even though they may come across to the general public and say that we have changed, and that we want to give everybody the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, but at the same time you really can't help people's emotions and feelings that have developed over the last 20 years. So obviously there's going to be a period of comparison between how they were then and how they were portrayed at that point, and what they did during the last 20 years ago. So I think that that's probably why people are so not hung up, but they're very anxious about what the outcome of this is going to be for the general population. And at the same time, they have to redeem themselves. If they are true to their word, and they happen to bring a lot of stability and change within the country, then they're going to be held accountable for a lot of the things that they have promised that they have to deliver.
Yes, as Mr. Attai, yes, there's like Mr. Attai said, there's there's two pictures which we don't know what is what. Only the time will tell us the truth, because the past experience of the people from Afghanistan, from Taliban is dark. So that is the fear is still there ruling. And as Mr. Attai said, there's a lot of propaganda as well. So we don't know exactly what, only the time will tell. So we'll move on to next question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. My next question to Ms. Hanifi. There are many social media. As soon as the Taliban moved into and America started withdrawing overnight, there are many social media campaigns and calling for the sanctions against a particular country, neighboring country. What is the truth behind it? It's like a panicking. Can you please? Yeah.
I think there's a huge history between the two countries. So between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there's a huge history. Now they both obviously share a border with each other, which kind of doesn't complicate things, but there has been issues in the past, especially since 1947 when Pakistan gained its independence. But they've always sort of had those ties that and geopolitically Afghanistan is situated in a very sort of in the middle, because you've got India on one side, Iran, Pakistan, and so forth. But in that there has been, if we look at from the time of the Taliban in the 1996 all the way through to 2001, and then from 2001 from the Karzai government and then the Ghani government, Pakistan has still been heavily involved within the country, which obviously would mean that when people say sanction Pakistan, I don't think they understand the implications of that on the country. And Rustam and I were talking about this before as well, that they don't understand what this actually means, because when you sanction another country, we have a foreign trade with one another. That could also implicate, what's going to happen in Afghanistan as well. So when and I guess I understand people's emotions. I get all of that. I get people are angry. They know the involvement between the two countries for a very long time, and Taliban. According to people, Taliban have been heavily funded by Pakistan. So naturally, there's going to be those sentiments, and that's going to come, resurface itself. But they don't understand from an economical perspective what that means for the country and the implications of that for Afghans generally. When we sanction another country, or right now, for example, when the United States has sanctioned Afghanistan. So there's literally billions of dollars sitting in the United States Reserve that belongs to Afghanistan, but they won't release that. So when they do things like this, that implicates the country, which means that it affects our GDP. Afghanistan is the poorest country in the world, considered as one of the poorest countries in the world. It affects our foreign trade policies. It affects the way we do, trade within the country. People. If we can put the sentiments aside and see the bigger picture, I don't agree with the concept that we should be sanctioning Pakistan, not if it's going to implicate our country.
Thank you very much, because Pakistan also shouldered all the burden since 1979 with Afghanistan, and Pakistan and Afghanistan share the longest border and same ethnicity and culture interchange and all the time traveling. Anyway, thank you for the giving that.
Can I just
yes, please. Yes, please.
Can I add to that? I can add to that as well. Yes. I totally agree with that. So the thing with the sanction is, like, people are sanctioning because of Pakistan government support for Taliban, but it will be the Pakistani citizens who will suffer the consequences of economic sanctions. And it's not just the Pakistani citizens, it will also affect all the Afghan refugees that live in Pakistan. No country in the world hosts as many Afghan refugees as Pakistan does. So what's going to happen is, if there's sanctions there, it's going to create a problem for the Pakistani citizens. It will create a problem for the Afghan by default, because they'll be like, well, we're having difficulty maintaining and providing for our own people. how are we going to be able to accommodate further for these refugees? Then on top of it as well, it will increase hate crimes against Afghan refugees that live in Pakistan, saying, well, you guys have brought this upon us. So there's a lot of negative implications from such things. And it doesn't really, I'm not a big supporter of sanctions, especially with countries that you have a close relationship with, like exactly like Miss Hanifi said. So I totally agree with her. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
And Pakistanis that 7 million Afghans that currently live in Pakistan who are refugees. So this will also implicate them. This will cause problems for them. I think, and I understand people's emotions and their sentiments against what's going on at the moment or whatever's unfolding, but at the same time we need to just be mindful of the bigger picture, how that's going to look for Afghanistan in terms of longevity.
Yes, I understand. And in the past 20 years or 40 years ago, Pakistan was different. And last few years, Pakistan is coming towards to the different. So you can't blame for the past and for the people and the country. And what both of you said give a more clearer vision for our audience, because there's lots of confusion and there's lots of going on in the social media and things. So thank you very much. That's really clear. There are lots of clouds. So can I ask next question? Is that?
Yeah.
Next question to Mr. Attai. Do you think the better future for Afghanistan can be achieved by an inclusive government of every section? Because there's a big diversity in the Afghan community, that society, including the Taliban as well. What is your thoughts about that, about this?
Look, definitely. This is the thing that people need to understand. Taliban is a reality that we cannot escape in Afghanistan. You can't exclude them, because by excluding them, Afghanistan is going to be in a state of constant war. That's the problem that people don't realize. Like, yes, people have problems with them, and they've got a really dark past, but the Taliban is very powerful. They always have been, even pre the 2001 invasion by the US. Taliban was, they controlled most of Afghanistan, and even after, they've always just had such a, they're such a big power, and they've got such a big support. You cannot exclude Taliban. So the question now is not about, a government that includes different sections of the society in Afghanistan, but this question should go to the Taliban leadership, and that's something that they should be considering in their rule, and that is to have a more inclusive government. And I guess if they do that, it will, hopefully if they do that, I like to think positively, it will, de-escalate the tension and the mistrust that the different people have with the Taliban, especially groups like the Hazaras, who were like severely persecuted before, and even while during the occupation of Afghanistan, the Hazaras were persecuted by Taliban and ISIS. So to earn their trust, and it's just I think for the better of Afghanistan, it would definitely for them to have a bit more inclusive government, and give different sections of different tribes, different regions of Afghanistan a certain amount of autonomy to rule their citizens, and yeah, definitely I think it's better for the Afghan future.
Yeah, because the America themselves signed the agreement with the Taliban, so it means Taliban.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, Taliban is a powerful, and they are Afghanis. They are not coming from. So it is. It's good that I personally and we all the peace-loving world love that inclusive government. That the only government can bring prosperity and peace in Afghanistan, not excluding one certain section of the community.
It took the United States nearly 20 years to realize that they cannot exclude Taliban after so many people getting killed. I believe there's like 170,000 people that were directly killed as a result of the US invasion, and twice that amount indirectly killed as a consequence of this war. All of that for nothing, you know. And had the US negotiated with Taliban earlier, you know, a lot of deaths could have been avoided. There could have been peace earlier. But unfortunately, you know, it's always a power struggle between different superpowers, and the result is people that the civilians that suffer.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You know, America should have brought Taliban on the political table, so lots of killing and damage should have stopped. Even if, you know, that's a very good point. Yeah.
As you said when you started the show, you know, even Joe Biden mentioned that today as well. Afghanistan is known to be the graveyard of empires. It's been unconquerable throughout history. So when you've got resilient people like that, and so many different tribes, and they all have, you know, they're not very united, obviously. Like, you have to approach them in a very sensitive manner, and you know, like the Taliban, they are a big majority, and you just have to deal with them. Otherwise, it's just going to be ongoing war. And you know, and same with the Taliban, they'll just have to deal with other groups. And for example, at the moment, they will struggle with, which they struggled before as well, with the Panjshir Valley region, which is also a very strong area, stronghold of Afghanistan, that they were, you know, back before the invasion, and they were known as the Northern Alliance. It was one of the only parts in Afghanistan which was not taken over by the Taliban, and even now, but like, they're standing against them, but they are trying to negotiate a peace deal with the Taliban. And you know, if they can be a bit compromising, it will be better for them, for their own rule, and for the greater Afghanistan. So I guess we just have to wait and see if Taliban has become smarter, the new Taliban 2.0, as everyone's been saying, and a bit more moderate, or they're just the same, and you know, it's just a political game that's been playing. But we'll know all the answers within time anyway, you know. So
yeah, because I myself wrote 3 articles. My last one was about, you know, because Panjshir, the leader, what is his name, Ahmad Massoud, even they come towards Taliban and to have an agreement, have an inclusiveness, and it's more about tolerance and flexibility. That's what they should, you know, because we are not all the same, but we are all one peace and prosperity. So I think inclusive government, and Taliban is a reality, as you said. Taliban is a reality of Afghanistan, and they are native Afghans. So my next question, you know, both of you can tell me, because the Australian government has offered to take 3,000 Afghans.
So can I, before we move on,
please.
Just in relation to that Taliban, my understanding is the Taliban, there is a lot of native Afghans, but there's also a lot of Pakistani members as well, and they see themselves as one with the Afghans. So it's a mix, and this is where a lot of the Afghans have a problem as well. They see them as purely, it's not purely Pakistani members, and it's not purely Afghan. There is a mix of both, you know. So yeah.
Because people live both sides of the Durand Lane. They both,
that's right,
same people, and they feel like they're same country, and even they don't understand, they don't consider the border between two nations. So they always, because I was reading the history of Durand Lane, and even both it's uncontrollable borders. The border is flexible, and people go and come, and you don't know who is there and who is.
Exactly.
That's what Imran Khan in one of his interview he said, that there is no control over that. Same people, same, and we don't know who lives in this part, who lives. So that's a good point as well. So my next question, like, you know, in the beginning, I attended some webinar organized by some Labour MPs who talked to the Foreign Affairs, and they told us in the webinar, they said Australia has offered 3,000 Afghans, but unfortunately now the airport isn't closed, and I don't think Australia can fulfill the promise. And what do you think? How can you communicate or make a lobby the Australian government to bring more? That time I asked, how are you going to bring the Afghans? They said only from UAE there is a Australian air base, From there only they can transport from Kabul to that airbase. But after that, the airport is closed. So what is the situation about that? Do you have any update on that? Both of you can answer.
As far as I know, announced that the last aeroplane to leave Afghanistan was 9 p.m. That's pretty much closed now. So in terms of Australia's involvement at the moment, in terms of providing humanitarian refugee visas, I don't think it's enough. You know, Australia didn't provide an extra or extra. That 3,000 comes out of their 13,500 quota that they have every year. So it's really not something that they've done extra special for Afghans, which I think is really a slap across the face, particularly because, you know, Australia's involvement in Afghanistan for the last 20 years, they're a part of that entire 20 years involved a lot of people who were obviously logistic people, fixers. There were professionals that were involved in there, which made up majority of it would have made up the Hazara community, and yet they're stranded there because, you know, Australia is only limiting. There's not, you can't say that there's only 3,000 people that they're offering this amount to just 3,000 new visas. These are 3,000 people over the course of, you know, so many years that are probably sitting there in the visa processing department. So it's really a shame because Australia owes it to Afghanistan, you know, and I think 3,000 is really not good enough, firstly, and secondly, there's a lot of advocacy groups at the moment, and there's a lot of lobbyist groups that are trying to see if that amount can be increased. I know Scott Morrison last week said that that's a ceiling, or that's a base. It's not the ceiling, but you know, I mean, I'm really finding that hard to believe at this point. But yeah, I'm a bit annoyed, to be quite frank with you, because at the end of the day, after 20 years of being involved in a country, and you know, there's obviously a lot of issues that also arose from their involvement. To just say we're only going to offer you 3,000 people, that's
yeah. Australia got really obligation towards people of Afghanistan.
Absolutely. I mean, if we're going to look back at the history, the last 20 years, you know, Australia there's been a lot of atrocities that has happened within Afghanistan, firstly by the US-led invasion, and secondly, you know, the Brereton report was one of the most, you know, significant reports out there that outlined that, you know, 39 innocent Afghan people were killed by the Australian ADF, which to me is you know, something really significant. And yes, the Australian government owes Afghans the right to come, and not just at 3,000. You know, we're requesting 20. I know there's 20,000. There's a lot of advocacy group at the moment. There's a petition going around, which I believe close to 150,000 people have signed, to get the Scott Morrison government to change that.
Thank you. And what about you, Mr. Attai?
Yeah, look, when we compare the refugee intake of Australia to some of the other countries, it's quite laughable. It's quite low. Like UK and Canada, they've announced to intake 20,000 refugees, and then you look at Australia, and you know, their intake is a lot lower, despite, you know, their involvement in the war, and you know, also some people who've worked and helped the Australian government during their time over there. I know that they'll probably be given some priority for their visas, but you know, including their families, and not just them. That's just like their minimal obligations that they should at least be getting them in. But besides them, just from the general population as well, there should be a bigger intake. So yeah, no, it's definitely 3,000 is not much.
Yeah, we're talking about 3,000, and just think about Afghanistan's neighboring country, Iran and Pakistan. They're having 3 million each for last 40 years. So yeah, that's a big amount, and they're sharing all these expenses.
Well, it's quite embarrassing because when you compare it to Uganda, they've said they'll temporarily host, at least for the time being, 2,000 refugees, just 1,000 less than than Australia, and you can't compare the Uganda's economy and to Australia, and like they don't even have any ties or involvement with Afghanistan. So
That's true.
yeah.
So that's obvious. To know all the Hanif Bismi show audience, they know that the different perspective of the incidents, what's happening in Afghan, and people from Afghan background, like both of you, and you have still families there. And what we think that, not only think that what will be better for Afghanis is the inclusive government, and international community has to give all the aid, and friendly nations, friendly towards two neighboring countries, which is they also oust millions of refugees, Pakistan and Iran, and hopefully Afghanistan will come up again, because they are the people who you can't conquer, and they will always come. 40 years, still they are there. So I appreciate both of your time. And by the way, I'm currently writing my second book on Afghanistan. So, and once again, yes, I'm still looking for the title, what the title should be, but I'm started. First chapter is almost finished, and so once again, thank you for coming to Hanif Bismi show, and we once again very thank you for your time, and maybe in the future we'll host another Hanif Bismi show. Once again, welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night. Have a nice time, and hopefully peace will prevail in Afghanistan.
Inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. Hope so.